So who loves conflict? Okay, some of you are on board. Yeah, I mean, for those of you who maybe didn't raise your hands on loving conflict, I want to say that's not your fault. It's because you haven't been modeled healthy conflict, and you've probably experienced destructive conflict, and a lot of that comes from our culture around conflict and our culture in general, the structure of our world, of our economic system, of our family systems. And we've heard a lot about this morning in all these different ways from incredible speakers. And I want to take a moment before kind of diving in to just land here before talking about maybe some sticky stuff. Let's take a couple deep breaths together, breathing out. Deep breath in, filling your whole lungs. Exhale with a sigh. Another deep breath in. And this time exhale with a wiggle. So, conflict. My name is Lux, and I do love conflict, but I don't love conflict itself. I love what's on the other side of conflict. And I love that I've been able to experience that depth and deeper intimacy of relationship with myself and relationship with other people that comes when we talk about things, and when we talk about things that might be hard to talk about. I'm looking at one of my best friends right here, and we've had conversations like, hey, that didn't feel good to me. And we show up for them, and it builds such deeper trust. And I know some of you have probably experienced that, and then there's relationships where you probably can't even imagine that. And personally, I came to conflict work through living in community. Who's lived in community? You probably get it, right? The closer that we are, the more that we rub up against each other. And the more different that we are, the more likely we are to rub up against each other, because we have different life experiences, different backgrounds, different stories and beliefs, and all of those come into play in conflict. And what we've inherited collectively, and I'm going to speak in generalizations. I know that each of us has our own family system. Some of us probably come from different cultural backgrounds than the dominant US culture, but I'm going to speak to the dominant US culture primarily in what we've collectively inherited around conflict. So what do we believe about conflict? It's bad. It's scary. It's evidence that something is going wrong or someone needs to be cast out of belonging. It leads to other people being scary. Sometimes conflict leads to like big reactions, right? And anger, things that we don't want to feel. Conflict puts us in contact with the things that we don't want to feel. And we've also inherited this belief that it has winners and losers, right? If you're in an argument or you have a conflict with someone, there's often this sense of like, one of us is wrong, and we just have to figure out who it is and make them pay for that. Who resonates with this? You feel that? Yeah. We're gonna get through this section and then do a little shaking. But yeah, there's also this sense that whoever is strongest and loudest is probably gonna win, right? If you're the most assertive, the most dominant, you win, and then you solve the conflict by winning. We see this in our presidential, right? Like, fucking not my president, but the person who's in power, holding a lot of power, right? Has this obsession with winning. That is a direct reflection of our culture that is competitive and puts us against each other. And capitalism contributes to this too, right? Because there's resource scarcity that's being created. And so we're often, a lot of us, at a base level, our nervous systems are in a survival state. We don't feel like we are inherently safe, and the people around us aren't necessarily there for us or supporting us. And because of this, when something comes up, like a conflict, it's really easy for us to respond with our protective survival responses because we're not feeling like there's care and connection and collaboration within the group field. Our nervous systems aren't resourced enough to slow down and have a conversation and like look at ourselves and each other. And so we just protect, stand behind our story about how the other person's wrong, and maybe move on without any resolution. And often when someone is hurt, there's a sense that whoever hurt them is bad and wrong, and hurt is kind of a competition. So whoever's the most hurt is like the good one, and whoever hurt them is the bad one. And when we do something wrong, there's a sense of like, you actually should have known already that that was wrong, and you should have done something differently. When in fact, a lot of times these things come up because they're moments for us to learn. Like, oh, this is how you want to be treated, which is different, right? We're told, treat each other the way that you want to be treated. Like, I should treat you like how I want to be treated. That's like the golden rule, right? But we actually should treat each other the way that the other person wants to be treated, right? And so we have to learn kind of what are the different needs and kind of communication styles that we need to adapt in order to have relationship with people who are different than us. And this is also, like I said, connected to our larger culture, right? We're, like Alex spoke to so beautifully earlier, we're cut off from this village, right? From a deeper sense of belonging. I like the framework that Kai Chen Thom brings in of an ecosystem of attachment. That we're connected not just to our parents and maybe some aunties or something, but a whole web of community. We're grown up in a culture where we feel our connection to spirit and to the natural world, that if one relationship is struggling, we have resource and we feel connected within a web of attachment. But most of us grew up, and not all of us, but most of us grew up in a nuclear family model where we have like maybe two people that we're relying on for our emotional attachment needs to be met. And maybe those people are struggling and stressed out under capitalism, and maybe they don't have the tools because they weren't raised in a whole culture to be able to like show up for our pain when we're small children struggling, and all we need is someone to be with us. And there's so much fixing and pushing away of the hard emotions of other people because we're not comfortable with the hard emotions inside of ourselves. And yeah, this is also, as you know, connected to like our legal and our judicial systems, right? That hold this same culture. Once someone is bad, which often they're not bad, right? They're reacting from their hurt, and then it comes out as hurting other people. And we don't have systems supporting healing, supporting parents so that these cycles are interrupted. And so they just keep repeating. And then if you end up having a strong nervous system reaction that causes outward harm towards someone else, you will get punished. That can start as little as like in first grade, where you're like kind of the loud, angry kid because your home life is bad, and then you get told off in front of everyone, ashamed and embarrassed, and then you get set out of the classroom, or kind of shown that you're different, you don't belong, and then that continues into like the prison systems, right? The school to prison pipeline, and people who have caused harm are like cast out of belonging, not supported to do the healing work that they need to do to end these cycles. And so with all of that inheritance, yeah, we don't love conflict. Conflict means like death, essentially, like, because if we get cut out from belonging, we are social beings. We need each other to survive. And so let's just take a moment, feel like what's here in your body with this. Maybe there's some heaviness in your heart, kind of like a crunchy, twisty feeling in your gut. And then you can just shake it off a little bit if you want. Oh, this culture that we didn't ask for. I didn't want to live in a world of domination. And here we are, trying to do something different. So I want to honor that. We'll move into that in a moment. But yeah, I also want to encourage just another moment. If you want, you can rub your temples with me. This helps stimulate the vagus nerve. So just doing a little self-massage, bringing in resource into these sticky places. Yeah, so, well, I guess we're going to stay in the stick for a little bit longer, because there's those beliefs and those systems, right? And then there's what happens because of that. What do we do with conflict when we think it's bad? We avoid it, right? Who are my conflict avoiders in the house? Yeah. Yeah, stuff it under the rug, right? Keep the peace. And yeah, we try to like not bring up conflict because it feels like it's gonna lead to disconnection rather than deeper connection. We also, if we do feel like we have power, sometimes we're gonna fight, right? When conflict comes up, we're gonna be like, my needs matter. And we'll do that in kind of that competitive framework, like my needs matter, not yours. My needs matter more. Also, if someone else is coming with us with that energy of like, my needs matter more, then we're gonna be like defensive, right? That's a natural response to be defensive when you feel that you're being attacked. So I really like, coming from a trauma-informed background, I also just wanna normalize all of the like destructive conflict behaviors and patterns that we've inherited. They are part of our nervous system, like just trying to keep ourselves safe, right? We're defensive, we maybe fawn and just immediately are like, how can I do whatever you need so that I can feel safe? But within that, I'm not listening to my own needs, and those are important too. And sustainable relationship comes from both people's needs being met. And most of us have some kind of like go-to conflict strategy. So there's those of us who raised our hands for avoid, and there's also this accommodate, people please. Who are the people pleasers in the house? Yeah, that's definitely me. The argue and compete people who are like, I'm gonna stand up for myself. Yeah, nice, come on, good fight response. And then there's collaborate, right? Which is what we wanna move towards, which is like, hey, some of my needs aren't being met here. I'm wondering what your needs are and how your behaviors might be trying to meet your needs and how we could kind of collaborate on figuring out a way that both of our needs are met. And yeah, all of these protective responses often are keeping us from feeling like the bad feelings and the deeper wounds behind them. And the problem is that all of these strategies, rather than de-escalating conflict, tend to exacerbate it, which is why we have not just the belief, but the felt experience that conflict is bad. Because when we act from a place of defensiveness, then the other person doesn't feel heard. And then they're like, well, I've proven that you're bad now because you didn't hear me. And it just creates further division. And instead, so I have this metaphor of like dryer lint, right? There's like, you don't empty the dryer lint like after 4 months when it's built up to the point that like your house might catch on fire. Maybe you do, I hope not. But you empty the dryer lint every time you do the laundry, right? It's a part of tending. And in relationship, especially when we live together or like have a lot of interaction, things are gonna come up where we kind of like rub each other the wrong way. And we need to figure out how to have that process of like emptying the dryer lint together. And something that sometimes happens in conflict is we like pull a thread. Like I just, my friend was on the phone with a friend just the other night and they said something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way and I made a comment about it. Like I was like, oh, that was a little crunchy for me. You know, I thought it was just gonna be this like short little feedback thing. And then they sent me like a 15-minute voice memo that was like, hey, that brought up all these things for me. And like, I could have been like, oh, this is so annoying. And like, you're not taking my feedback. And like, ugh, and instead I was like, oh, I pulled a thread and there's a tangle connected to it. There's more here to tend that we haven't talked about. And me opening up the door with my little piece of feedback brought in like a deeper conversation. So, I responded, and we're gonna make some intentional time to talk about it, because that's one of the strategies that helps conflict happen in a good way. Because when we don't talk about it intentionally, we talk about it passive aggressively, right? Like that little comment in the kitchen, like, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna do these dishes later. Like, I'll believe it when I see it, It's like those little comments that we make that have a lot of unmet needs behind them, where we haven't sat down to be like, yo, my needs aren't being met here. And ultimately, we're responsible for our own needs. And that includes asking for help when we need help meeting our needs, but no one else is responsible for your needs being met, except your parents were, and they maybe didn't do a good job, and that is really sad, and that is what leads to a lot of these ongoing patterns that keep us disconnected when we really just want deep connection. And another thing that can happen is this kind of like trauma conflict like cycle, where I see something and I make it a story about it, right? There's like the dishes or whatever being left. I have a story that it's like, oh, that person was just, going and like living their life, and they don't care about me in the house, and this is just further evidence of that pattern that they don't care about anyone but themselves. And I can create a whole story, and I call that a grievance narrative. We create a grievance narrative, and then when we come to the conflict conversation, we need someone to like validate and believe our grievance narrative, or they don't care about us. But really underneath that grievance narrative is like deeper needs, like I'm feeling insecure about whether you care about me. And the dishes are evidence that you don't. And if we can get underneath to those deeper needs, there's a variety of strategies that you might be able to show me that you care about me more. The dishes might be one way that could help me feel cared for, but there might be other things that could come in and meet that same need. And that's another common mistake. We come into conflict with a fixed strategy. Like, if you don't do this thing to prove that you love me, you obviously don't love me. Like, that's kind of a setup for failure. So within this cycle, we have a grievance narrative, and when I come in with my grievance narrative, it triggers you, and then you have your grievance narrative, and we're like stuck in this kind of like tug of war. But we don't actually have to agree with each other in order to understand each other, right? We can understand someone's story and be like, that makes sense, without being like, that is absolutely true and what happened. Be like, that makes sense that you felt that way. That makes sense that me going to like have a fun night and leaving the dishes had an impact on you. That makes sense to me. And what do you need, right? Starting with that like curiosity. We can empathize without fully validating the story. So take another moment take a few breaths, digest this through your body. And I'm doing this intentionally because I think that pausing is a very important practice in conflict. When we get into these stickier conversations that bring up things that are charged, just taking like 10 seconds of space throughout them can really help our nervous systems like settle back into a place of like, okay, I can actually hear you. And so leaving all of that behind, all of those dysfunctional patterns and beliefs about conflict, leaving that behind, sweeping it, not under the rug, maybe into the compost. What do we want to believe and model around conflict instead? Conflict is a normal part of life. It's actually natural. It's meant to happen. And it's a transformative force. There's this rune, Narvaez, that is one of the runes I call the conflict runes, and it's 2 sticks rubbing together. And you can even take your hands and rub them together and feel that heat between your hands, that friction, right? It's tension, comes from the tension of pressing two hard objects against each other, and it creates heat. And heat is generative, and you can take that heat and put it somewhere on your body and send yourself some love. But just like friction is needed to start a fire, right? A friction fire. Conflict is needed to catalyze transformation. And it is a gift, it is a teacher. And if we approach it with that reverence, it can show us many, many beautiful things. And that includes showing us our wounds. They might be hard to look at, but they're sacred and important. It also shows us like what our needs are that aren't being met, where we might need to speak up for ourselves more, own our needs. And this generative friction, it is revealing wounds that are showing up because they want to have a different experience, right? Maybe when we were younger and we got really mad, we were shut down and not listened to. But now we can get a little mad and be like, hey, that hurt me. And maybe our friend could actually hear that. You know, if we do it in the right way, in an intentional container where we're consenting to having a hard conversation. Maybe in that container, we can have a different experience. And that wound can unhook the story that I'm not allowed to be mad. And it can repattern and renegotiate that trauma story into the experience of when I am mad, I'm showing myself that I care for myself. And people that care about me will care about that too. And so conflict is an opportunity to renegotiate our deepest relational wounds. And how, another framework is that coming from an indigenous worldview and from specifically this book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview, they talk about conflict transformation or conflict resolution as return to community. And that actually when there's conflict or when there's harm showing up in a community, it's a reflection of the community and the patterns that the community needs to look at, right? And so often our conflicts are isolated and kept behind closed doors, and we don't talk about them because we're worried about triangulation, and we don't have a healthy conflict culture. But in cultures that did or do, conflict can be brought into the center and tended together, and that lesson that's learned by those two people ripples through the whole community, so that conflict conversation doesn't happen between other people in the same way, because they have a reference point, like, yeah, well, I'm being reactive just like my uncle, right? Oops, and it's okay, we gotta stop and look at those things together. And it's not about being perfect, right? So much of our toxic conflict culture is that we're trying to change our culture, but we're still using oppressive tools to do so. We're trying to build a healthy, beautiful world where everyone belongs. But as soon as I see someone do something that seems a little bit iffy or dismissive to someone, it's so easy to judge and attack that person because they're not being inclusive. But guess what? When we judge and attack each other, we're also not being inclusive. And so we have to learn new ways of upholding a new culture or an old culture. But it's not going to be the same tools that are used in our punitive domination culture. So we have to learn to show up with curiosity and love, right? All these things that we say we aspire to, and we're not perfect, and I don't want us to be perfect, but I do want us to try to embody our values, right? A little bit better, where we can call each other in rather than calling each other out. And conflict is work, so I do want to acknowledge it takes time and energy, and it's actually not our responsibility to be invested in doing that work with everyone. We used to have kind of a set community of relationships and a village life, right? Those are the people you're invested in doing this work with. Now we use the word community if we show up to the space with a bunch of people we've never met before, and we might have an interaction that kind of rubs us wrong. Do you have to give that person feedback? You don't have to. If you feel like relational depth and trust, it's usually beneficial to initiate those conversations. But we actually don't have to do that work with everyone. And I think that's important to remember too. And there's a little song I caught about conflict I want to bring in here. Because I think it's easy, sometimes once we're like, okay, I need to communicate about things. It's like, we want to communicate about every little thing, right? But that actually can destroy the fabric of connection when we're constantly pointing out everything that doesn't resonate with us, like people are supposed to be exactly upholding everything that we believe all the time. So this song kind of speaks to that with the first line. And then, yeah, it just offers that reminder of like how to show up. And it's kind of a cute, like it feels like a kid's song, but I think it's kind of that education that we never got as kids about how to show up in conflict. I'll sing it. If you can truly let it go, let it go. But if you can't let it go, let them know. Let your feelings show. Ask for what you need. Take it slow. And that last part, take it slow, right? It's another huge lesson in conflict. Because we think it's bad and scary, we barrel through it, right? We're like, how can this conversation end as quickly as possible? And we don't slow down enough to say, hey, thank you for showing up for this. I feel nervous. This friendship means a lot to me. And I am showing up because I want to practice speaking for things that I need, and that's really hard for me. And I'm gonna try my best, but it might not be perfect, and I'm just gonna ask for some grace. Are you willing to hear my experience? And that like kind of slowing, like stepping towards it, right? Not like jumping in, like, hey, I need to talk to you. Something you did really messed with me, man. It's like, okay, that's like gunning right in, and we need to remember like, oh, there's connection here, right? There's trust here. That's why we're doing this, because we care about each other, because we appreciate each other, and we want to show up honestly. And sometimes, you know, we actually need a little space to move through the layers of conflict. A lot of us who are anxious attached, who's anxious attached a little bit, hey, tend to want to fix things right away because the disconnection feels like a threat. And with that, we can try to talk about things before they're really ready to be talked about. Because sometimes, yeah, our nervous systems need a chance to like come back into resource. We need a chance to like reflect on like, how did I show up? How did I contribute to that conflict? Because a lot of the times, there might be like an initial moment that sparks a conflict, but the rest of what happens like is co-created, and each person has some responsibility, right? And so sometimes, and this is another teaching from the Indigenous Worldview book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview, they talk about actually, sometimes, instead of trying to solve the conflict, you should just go pick berries together, right? Like sometimes you just need to rebuild connection before you can do the hard thing again and like go back into the wounded parts, and, you know, just rebuilding some positive connection where you feel like, oh yeah, there's something here that we care enough about to do that hard work. So can I just offer a few more tips on how we do it, right? I talked about having an intentional conversation. That's one of the skills that I introduce in my Conflict and Communication Fundamentals workshop, which you can buy on my website or Linktree or whatever. But we talk about, initiating a conversation. Because often that's the barrier. It's like, we know we need to have a conversation, but we haven't like sparked it, right? We need to initiate that, have that initial check-in with someone where we share enough to be like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you. And it's not just like a hangout. There's a little more reflection and work, emotional work in it. But yeah, we have to get that consent, right? Because those conversations are going to happen a lot better. We're going to feel a lot more collaborative when we show up saying, yes, I want to be here. And also, with that, we need to bring in lots of resource and care, whether that's beforehand, just like making sure you're not like working right up until the moment you have that conflict conversation, or showing up with like a gift for them, or like whatever it is that helps kind of feed that nourishment, because our nervous systems need like resource in order to process trauma. So bringing in resource, taking responsibility for our experience. Like you can learn communication models like NVC, right? But you can also just say, my story is that you don't care about me. And that's different than saying, you don't care about me, right? It's like, I'm owning, like, I have this story that this is what happened. And I'm not gonna put that on you, but I want you to hear my experience. And then when we listen to each other, how do we actually feel heard? Because a lot of conflicts get tripped up by someone sharing something and then the other person's like, yeah, well, my experience was this. And it's like, okay, cool. We're just like talking past each other on different realities. And instead we can listen and acknowledge each other's experiences. And like I already said, taking it slow, right? So making spacious time and knowing that it's an investment to show up for those conversations, an investment in relationship. So taking another moment, just digesting this before we come to a close. So just want to offer just a few last thoughts on why this all matters. And I believe this matters deeply in terms of changing our culture. Because if we can't resolve our own conflicts, we rely on systems of domination to solve them for us. If we can't resolve our own conflicts, we will lean on formal or informal systems of hierarchy. And that this willingness to collaborate is also a willingness to step out of a domination-based system and into a relational system where everyone actually does matter. This is how we do kind of what Ashley was speaking to earlier of like becoming sovereign, right? This is like the individual ripple of that, like becoming our sovereign selves in relationship with each other by like taking responsibility for our own needs. And yeah, then we can do work together, right? We can live together, we can build community together, because often conflicts can show up in our activist organizing spaces or in our, conscious community spaces, and it can create more separation and ripple through the whole community and tear things apart. But if we know how to do conflict differently, those could be moments of deepening together. And I actually believe, which so many beautiful thinkers are speaking to these days, like the revolution starts here, right? The revolution happens at the level of relationship. And we need revolutionary relationships in order to have revolutionary movements together. Yes. And yeah, I study this and I care about this because it means a lot to me, right? Because I, like you, probably really want to live in a different world, really want to pass on a different culture to the next generations, where they don't have to be in survival mode or not having their emotional needs met and kind of scared of each other, where they can lean into connection and really re-village like we're talking about. And within this, we're all still human, we're all still learning. That's the nature of conflict, that actually we're always gonna keep learning, right? And it's never gonna stop, but it might feel a little less like what we call conflict and a little more like tending our values, tending our relationships. So I want to invite you into deepening in that tending with me. That there's a few ways that we could stay connected, and I would love to, invite you all to participate in these different versions of relational healing that I'm stewarding and bringing into the world. One is a somatic connection circle, or somatic, what do I call it? Yeah, it's a somatic circle where we're doing somatic work and we're sharing. And it's happening every other Thursday in Portland, so the next one's May 8th. And then I'm gonna do a closed group of just a few folks going deep together for 4 weeks. And it's a space to kind of do this inner work in community, right? Deprivatizing, de-individualizing our healing, making it financially accessible, and making it de-shamified by being like, wow, I'm not the only one who feels that way.
What's the name of it again?
Somatic Support Circle. I got it now. Yeah, and I also, if you're interested in following up with any of this, on that back table where like Max Ribner's shirts are next to it, near the conscious Cascadia culture table, right next to it, there's a table, and I have my newsletter sign up. I have some stickers by donation. There's one that says conflict invites deeper intimacy. There's also normalize making mistakes. So if you want to get those stickers and spread those messages into the world, would love to have you pick one up and offer a donation. And then I have also like some flyers about things. So I am also a somatic practitioner doing one-on-one work with people to like get underneath into the deeper currents that are creating these wounded stories and experiences within conflict or just within yourself, right? We have inner conflict as well. So I have space for somatic clients, and I am also a conflict mediator. So if you're in a space where you're feeling crunchiness and you're like, we just can't get through this alone, that's so normal. We should be getting support in these hard spaces. And I would love to be able to support you. And I always am really just trying to make it work, like, you know, both for myself financially, but if I could just have everything I need and give my time to the world, I would, you know? So I want to figure out ways on collaborating to make sure our needs are going to be met in any kind of way that you want to receive my support. So thank you everyone for participating and believing in this culture that we can transform together.